This week's episode of the Renewables Report is really focusing on the flex markets in the UK. The UK energy landscape has undergone a pretty significant transformation. We've seen a huge rise in renewable energy sources like wind and solar. It's brought so many benefits, but there's also been a lot of new challenges around balancing supply with demand. There's a lot of complexities around it, and this is where flexibility comes into play. So if you could just start by introducing yourself and telling me a bit about Flexitricity's background, going from being one of the first movers in the open market, aggregated demand-side services for electricity and balancing, to becoming Britain's demand response leader. That would be great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks very much for having me. So I'm Andy Lowe. I'm the chief exec of Flexitricity. Flexitricity is 20 years old this year. We were founded in 2004 and went live with our first assets in 2008. Back then, large power stations dominated the market, and renewables growth was a thing, but it wasn't really happening yet. Coal, gas, and nuclear were, broadly speaking, where we got our power from, but decarbonisation, it was looking pretty certain. And we also knew that people wanted electricity on demand, but electricity is an event, it's not a commodity, it can't be stored unless you build that storage. So the system needed flexibility. That was a challenge which was essentially what the business was set up to address. How do you keep a decarbonising energy system which needs flexibility as efficient as possible when nearly all of the generators on it can't be flexible without losing efficiency? And the answer at the time was the customer, the company using the power. If we could work with the customer to be flexible with their assets and processes, then the thermal industry could be more efficient. The action would be lower cost in both carbon and economics than the alternative. And without impacting the day-to-day operations for the customer, we could deliver more money to them for being flexible. Clearly, the market's moved on a lot since then, but that is basically what demand-side response is in its rawest form. So we brought our first customers online, many of them who are still with us, and participated in short-term operating reserve and use of system cost avoidance services. We started delivering frequency response with behind-the-meter flexibility a little after that in 2012. And at that point, we took the business 24/7. So frequency response is a round-the-clock service, and we had committed to our customers that they would always have someone at the end of the phone and overseeing asset delivery. So there's been a human being overseeing our operations every minute of every day since then. Around the same time as that, we became pretty buried in electricity market reform to make sure that the types of flexibility we were bringing to the market were properly represented in the capacity market, and we were successful with this, and we've been in every CM auction since it started. And up until this point, we'd enjoyed strong organic growth across the portfolio. Then around 2016, and in the run-up to National Grid publishing their system needs and product strategy, we recognized that services available to us at the time were finite, both in terms of the volume required and indeed sort of how much longer they would actually be live services. And we knew that this meant that the value would inevitably reduce in those markets. Often when value from flexibility disappears from somewhere, it pops up somewhere else. And we believe the wholesale markets and the balancing mechanism, which is the tool National Grid used to balance supply and demand in real time, were clear areas where this value would be found. So we spent a year developing what we needed to become an electricity supplier. We secured our supply license in 2018. And later that year, we went live with our first supply customer, which is an energy centre connected to a private wire power network and a district heating scheme. At the end of that year, we went live with our first contracted batteries. And the year after that, we started optimizing gas peakers. We're a gas supplier as well. And since then, our portfolio and importantly, our capability has grown pretty exponentially. The systems, algorithms, and automation that you need to deliver at scale in this industry really is significant. I wouldn't ever be able to overstate that. We now have, comfortably over a gigawatt of flexibility contracted to our portfolio, and it's across hundreds of assets, close to 1,000 from a range of different sectors. We have humans in the loop 24/7, as I said, but you simply can't scale a business like this without, incredibly resilient systems, optimization tools, and automation. So now the portfolio is split roughly into thirds, not quite, but about thirds, with around a third energy storage, batteries, both standalone and co-located with renewables. About a third gas peakers, some of them are hybrid and co-located with storage too. And around a third is behind the meter flexibility or demand side response from, everything from cars plugged in on driveways right through to CHPs and large manufacturing and industrial processes. And we still flex these sites to generate value for the customer whilst delivering efficiency to the system, albeit the ways we're doing it have evolved, pretty materially since we started building the business 20 years ago. And we optimize across the full revenue stack, including wholesale markets, the BM, reserve services, frequency response, and services procured directly by distribution network operators. We firmly believe in the concept of revenue agility, which means, keeping all the assets agile and stacking suitable services to capture as much value as we can for our customers.
Amazing. I didn't realize that gas peakers was still such a large part of the portfolio, but it's really great to hear about just how balanced and widespread it is. You did touch on this sort of earlier in what you were just saying there, but why do you think it's so wider access to the real-time balancing market?
Yeah. So it is important to continue to create wider access, but it's also important to acknowledge how successful we and others in the market have been in achieving the breadth of market access we have already. So the narrative, I guess the narrative around large suppliers, being the only companies who have access to the real-time markets, and this essentially hindering the sector's growth because of the tendency for the core business of those companies diverting the focus they needed to actually bring dispatchable flexibility to the market. That narrative is still valid, but it's perhaps getting a bit more dated now. I certainly would have said that to you as we were launching our supply business back in 2018. In fact, I did say it to a lot of people, but we do have more market access now. Flexibility is on the system. It's here to stay, and it's a growth sector. It's no longer a new thing or a new concept. It's proven to deliver definitive benefit, and more flexibility is pretty central to all decarbonisation scenarios. And it's also clear that the system operators are paying very close attention to the capabilities of companies like us, and recognising how much value we bring to them now and in the future. But we're not all the way there yet, and we need to continue to widen the access and very importantly, get the rules of engagement correct to facilitate maximum benefit, ideally at the cheapest possible cost to those system operators.
Okay, no, that's amazing to hear. Tell me then a bit more specifically about Flexitricity's business, the different ways that any individuals, customers can access the balancing market through your energy supply or through Flexitricity's virtual lead party offering.
Yeah, okay, no problem. So when we talk about the balancing market, there's the balancing mechanism, which is the tool that National Grid use in real time to balance supply and demand. And then there are balancing services or ancillary services, and these are sort of, often forward procured services for reserve and frequency response. And we provide access to all of them. But I'll focus on the balancing mechanism to start with. Okay. Licensed generators, electricity suppliers, and virtual lead parties or VLPs can access the balancing mechanism. If the licensed generators don't want to optimize their own assets, then suppliers and VLPs can provide market access to the BM on behalf of the licensed generators. And there are a series of market rules governing the intricacies of the different types of this market access. And your listeners will be pleased to hear that I'm not going to go into those. So Flexitricity is a supplier. We became a supplier to bring behind the meter flexibility directly into the BM. We're also the supplier to all of the merchant batteries and gas peakers, which we optimize. However, we are not the right electricity supplier for everyone, and we acknowledge that. We offer a pretty niche supply arrangement, which is great for some businesses, but it does have limitations for others. We don't offer fixed price tariffs, for example, which a lot of the I&C market wants, as they need to have an element of security on that cost line. Often their business really depends on having that security. Also, in relative terms, we're small without the investment grade balance sheet that some of the big industrial and commercial users in GB need from their energy supply before they can, consider contracting with them. Energy supply to supermarkets, for example, is a £1 billion industry. For us to try and get into this space, the access to capital we need to collateralize 2-year fixed prices would be huge. And the attention, the management of that need would mean we'd probably sacrifice the bandwidth we need to innovate and bring value in real time for the flexibility we're actually trying to access. Much like many of the large suppliers have not been able to remain focused on developing and nurturing the agility that you need to make money for customers with those real-time opportunities, as I mentioned in my previous answer. But these customers are absolutely targets for us, just not as their supplier. Indeed, many of them are already customers. They often do have a lot of flexibility, sometimes more than they realize. And so we became a virtual lead party as well. And these users can appoint a VLP like Flexitricity to make their assets available in the BM without needing to rely on their electricity supplier to do this. So they can secure the energy supply contract they need, but they can appoint a VLP like us to provide the market access to the BM. So alongside other ancillary services, as the supplier, we can access wholesale markets and the BM. We've been doing this since 2018, and we were the first to do this with behind the meter assets. And as the VLP, we can access the BM, and we've been doing that since 2020. Again, we were the first to do it. Now, what's really exciting is that the breadth of market access afforded to VLPs is growing, and wholesale market access for VLPs is already approved and set for implementation by the end of this year. So we will be able to bring behind the meter flexibility into the wholesale markets as well as the BM without being the supplier to the site. So this is it's a huge milestone for the industry and its recognition of how far the market has come in recent years. It's also a huge opportunity. So, EV drivers, domestic heating and energy storage, district heating, renewables, community energy projects, industrial and commercial flexibility like refrigeration, HVAC, lighting will all be able to gain wholesale market access through a VLP. And we've been working for a couple of years now on some pretty exciting innovations to how we scale our platform in this space, which we're very much looking forward to launching over the next 6 to 12 months.
Absolutely. No, it sounds like definitely something that we should be keeping an eye out, as you say, over the next sort of half a year, 1 year out, just seeing how that grows. I mean, whilst we're on the topic of obviously the balancing mechanism, what would you say has been the result of the recent launch of the balancing reserve? What effects have you seen from that?
Okay, so balancing reserve is new, as you say. It launched in March this year. First of all, what is balancing reserve? So it's a service designed to achieve fewer price spikes during periods of scarcity or tight margins, essentially when there isn't enough supply to meet demand. For example, say wind generation and demand are both high, but there is then a sudden drop in wind generation, which does happen. National Grid needs to make up the shortfall with something else. CCGTs are sometimes available to provide this flexibility, but at peak times may be running at full power with no room to turn up. And in real time, that is in the balancing mechanism, flexibility is often available from things like batteries or small gas peaking plant, but National Grid has no guarantee of that availability. And so waiting until the moment they might need it puts them in a position of risk, which is, understandably is pretty unpalatable. The result of this is that National Grid need to turn on the more expensive gas and coal power stations to ensure they can get adequate reserve. And the knock-on impact of this has been that National Grid has spent a lot to secure reserve. Many people will remember the £6,000 per megawatt hour headlines from the last couple of years. So National Grid wants to procure in advance enough flexible generation to cover this shortfall and meet demand. And balancing reserve is one of the ways they're doing this. I would say the result of the launch of BR has been reasonably limited so far. A small pool of reserve is receiving payments in BR for making itself available in the balancing mechanism. But the initial requirement for the service is only 400 megawatts in each direction, which is relatively small, and we're expecting this to grow soon. Now, the launch of balancing reserve has no effect on balancing mechanism activity per se. By that, I mean that BR is intended to result in fewer price spikes during periods of scarcity, but it isn't explicitly used in dispatch. It's important to make that distinction, as some might think that BR has resulted in a material increase in the number of BM dispatches across the market, and that isn't really the case. A more significant reason for the increase in the number of instructions is actually as a result of National Grid's introduction of the Open Balancing Platform, or OBP. This was launched in December and has created an increase in BM activity for small plant and batteries by helping National Grid make efficient dispatch decisions, but basically without being affected by the manual workload associated with the older BM systems. They now have a bulk dispatch tool that can issue hundreds of instructions at the press of a button. The number of instructions has shot up from a daily average in the low hundreds for much of 2023 to some days where over 2,000 instructions are issued to these asset classes. So it's great progress, and we expect to see more opportunity as OBP continues to evolve. With National Grid, being quite open about their ultimate ambition that OBP will replace all the legacy BM and ancillary services dispatch decisions by 2027. So it feels a long way away, but in this market, it's not very far away.
That's really impressive actually, and a huge goal. I think that more people should be aware of that's something that they are promoting. I mean, looking ahead towards the future, what would you say your thoughts are on the future of the market and Flexitricity's growth? What can we expect to see there?
It's a good question. Few people, including me, like making bold predictions about specific future market aspects. There's a general tendency to wrap lots of things into quite a broad answer that comments on the different routes as opposed to the exact destination. So I hope you'll forgive me for reverting to form here. It's certainly the case that the GB market is in a state of transition at the moment, with new services, market access, and market rules being introduced to facilitate flexibility on the system. And companies like us, now having the capability to bring this to market at scale. We're seeing this already and are very encouraged by it. And we're also starting to get more information about what the future might look like. So REMA, which is the review of electricity market arrangements, it's in its consultation phase at the moment, but it's really looking to address long-standing inefficiencies, I guess, in the GB energy market design. The consultation, which just recently closed, it contains a lot of really significant detail that will have pretty far-reaching implications over the next decade. A big positive included in it is a commitment to increase the pace of renewable generation deployment, with the foundation of net zero being obviously in the ability to generate large volumes of green electricity, and a recognition that if organized well, wind and solar are capable of decarbonising a lot of the economy. But the organisation of it is critical. A lot of has been done here, but the questions which government is still wrestling with are basically about how to most efficiently get green power from where it is generated to where it can be used. These are still, very reasonable questions, and a reflection of the fact that there are going to be more challenges, as you said, and questions to address. But I'm pleased to say that flexibility is well recognised as a critical facilitator of decarbonisation, and will it will form part of the answer to all of them, sometimes the entire answer. And this doesn't just mean more of the same. It means new types of flexibility on the system, and it also means scale in a way that people haven't experienced before. And Flexitricity is certainly preparing for that.
Amazing. So we've got a lot to look forward to there. A lot of hopefully new big developments coming through. Thank you again so much for joining me on this. Yeah. Any final thoughts that you want to leave us with before we sign off today?
No, thank you very much for having me on. I think this is a fast-moving sector. I think the change that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years has been significant, and we're certainly looking forward to working with our peers in the industry to sort of continue our bit to facilitate the net zero transition.
Amazing. All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much again for joining.
Thank you for having me.